That was the decade it all went sideways. At the beginning, maybe we had a chance, but it was 10 fat years of nothing. It was a steady stream of the same stuff that had gotten us into this mess in the first place. In fact, it was a raging river, a deluge. No wonder we speak of those years with anger. We ought to have used them better. We ought to have used them, period. We thought at the time that things would improve despite us never giving ourselves good reason to believe so. But then we'd always thought things would improve. We couldn't see that during that decade things were not improving at all. Things were getting worse. Later we wondered about the cause of our blindness. Some of us knew that self-delusion was part of the package. Humans are like that. We think the universe roots for our team. We think somebody up there likes us. Even if we don't believe in magic, we believe in magic. On the one hand, thinking happy thoughts had got us through a lot of rough patches. On the other, it didn't prepare us for the pickle we were in. Now we are bitter but mercifully humbler about our place in the scheme of things. Not that being humble helps in a storm. In a storm you have to be bolder than you want to be. Better to have steered clear of it in the first place. The bitterest among us say it's a lesson humans have learned and forgotten 1,000 times. Some of us were pleased to call that decade a lost decade. It made us feel as if we were in the know. But then we couldn't help noticing that there were actually plenty of lost decades to go around. So to be fair, you had to fold that decade in with all those other lost decades. And at that point you realized you were now talking about not just lost decades, but lost centuries, maybe even lost millennia. Eventually you had to consider that perhaps the entire residency of humankind on Earth had been one big lost opportunity. Homo sapiens had turned out to be one of those unfortunate species that couldn't hold itself in check. It had overshot the mark from the get-go. It should have quit while it was ahead, at least before it got its hands on fire, or farming, or fuel oil. Some folks said humanity was uncomfortably similar to a bacteria that ran riot over its nutritive substrate. It ran right up to the edge of its petri dish. At that point it began falling back and consuming itself. What else could it do? There was nothing else on Earth for humankind but humankind itself. What you had here was a self-directed species directed to nothing other than its next meal. And so in that decade, the triumphant parade of history came to be seen for what it really was, a long and painful frog march toward oblivion. The weather was fickle that decade. Winters were milder and the summers hotter. Sometimes you couldn't tell what season you were in. You had to think for a minute. You woke up one day and there was snow. You woke up the next and there were gnats turning lazy circles around your head. The gnats didn't know what to think either. The wind blew harder. More people were losing their houses and lives to high winds. One family was lifted away by a tornado and never seen again. When the rain came, it fell angrily. The land wasn't always ready for it. There were too many floods for our liking. Where there weren't floods, there were droughts. In some parts, the droughts never broke. Crops failed. You couldn't call them droughts when they lasted so long. They were the new growing conditions. The planetary thermostat was on the fritz. Tongues of fire licked beetle-bored trees. Whole forests went up in smoke. You couldn't trust the elements anymore. Even a pleasant spring day felt wrong. Everybody complained about the weather and nobody did anything about it. The pessimists bellyached during that decade. Bellyaching was their thing. In retrospect, we should have heeded them. But the pessimist has a tougher case to make than the optimist. It's true that both project the present too far forward to get a grip on it. The pessimist says if this goes on, we're screwed. The optimist says if this goes on, we're saved. In that decade, the pessimists were talking about things nobody wanted to see happen. They described dead seas and living hells. They asked for sacrifice and promised pain. The optimists were talking about things that most people would like to see happen. They described amazing gadgets and shooting par at age 100. They asked for nothing and promised the moon. Who were you going to tune out? The pessimists belonged to the Eeyore Brigade. They rubbed shoulders with the atheists and feminists and environmentalists. Those folks had always been grumbling about something. The optimists kept better company. They were part of the growth and prosperity set. Everybody likes to hear that fortunes are on the rise. The sunnier the forecast, the warmer the reception. We were by custom a bright-sided people. We were creatures of broad daylight. Darkness did not suit us. To get us up and moving in the middle of the night, you couldn't sound a warning bell. The pessimists rang it continually, and so we put cotton in our ears and went back to sleep. The scientists spoke up during that decade. They didn't get the hearing they deserved. To a lot of people, they sounded just like the pessimists. They came out of their labs and blinked in the sun. They had the facts in their pockets. The facts pointed to reality. But exactly what was reality anyway? The reality announced by the scientists was a downer. It didn't match our hopes. It didn't match God's plan. It didn't match the consensus at the barber shop. Most people said whatever. They said, haven't we heard this kind of gloom and doom before? Hasn't the sky always been falling? Don't we always land on our feet? We are hearing you scientists on the parts per million. We're listening to this talk of meters and centimeters. We're following the discussions of tipping points and rising curves. We know that you're measuring these things. We know you're unhappy with the measurements. It's a darn shame. But all of those things are happening far away and long in the future, most likely in Africa. They're not happening right here and now, not this weekend anyway. The playoffs are starting. Perhaps the grandkids will sort it all out. One unconcerned citizen said that he'd never seen a glacier, and so what if it melted? Glaciers didn't feature big in his town. The scientists talked as if they'd never held real jobs, had real mortgages, raised demanding children, wanted a few nice things in life. The scientists could talk all they wanted. It was a free country and they were entitled to their opinions. Their opinions didn't change the fact that the sun would come up and bills had to be paid. That decade was frustrating for those of us who studied these matters. We'd known for many years the planet was circling the drain. The big systems were all out of whack. You could point to any of the indicators and see it was so. Earth was rotting. It was boiling with maggots and the buzzards were stripping its flesh. It was bursting with life even in death. We knew the situation was dire. Anyone who bothered to ask us got an earful. We would give them the list. There were fewer birds and butterflies than in our youths. There were more mosquitoes and rats. Contagions galloped. Toxins leached. Fertilizers ran into the streams and then spilled into the lakes. Algal blooms fouled their shores. Dead zones appeared at the mouths of many large rivers. Other river mouths snapped shut. Their outpourings had been staunched higher up. Water was still for fighting. In the tropics, rainforests were cleared for cattle pastures and palm plantations. Folks liked cheap hamburgers and greasy spud. The last mountain gorillas were poached by militias and war refugees. Rhinos were wiped out because their horns cured impotency. Bear gall worked wonders on piles. Elephants became garden pests. Cheetahs were run off. Big mammals needed space, but we wanted it more. Tens of billions of chickens were devoured every year. Tens of millions of sharks were killed so that their fins could be made into tasty soup. Their mutilated carcasses were tossed back into waters teeming with jellyfish and plastic bags. Cod were wiped out. Tuna were next. Wild ocean life was just a big stranded protein acid until we could get our knives and forks into it. In the bread baskets, what dirt not nailed down by corn or wheat was blowing away. It seemed as if only people and soybeans were on the upswing. But people were outpacing beans. Food was a loaves and fishes equation without a Jesus. Earth could no longer cool itself properly. Earth had a fever. Earth had a head cold. Earth had irritable bowel syndrome. Even with the list, those of us who'd studied these matters during that decade couldn't seem to get through to those who hadn't. Either they weren't listening or we weren't enunciating. Later, we realized the problems were just too hard to explain and even harder to hear. There was no good way to communicate a theme so broad. You couldn't stick to the topic because the topic was all over the map. Not one damn thing in the human universe seemed unhitched from a sickening wrongness. It always came back to our species' miscreant ways, and so the discussion lacked the feel-good dimension our audiences preferred. You started to despise the sound of your own voice. You were a fearmonger or lunatic if you failed to acknowledge that all these problems were actually easy to solve. You had to speak in the tones of a cheerleader if you didn't want to be tuned out or shouted down. You had to end each plea for action by saying action was right around around the corner. Then people could forget about what you just said and carry on as before. The leaders of that decade looked to be twiddling their thumbs. At the time, people thought politicians were good or bad for the usual reasons. Were they good or bad according to the reasons we think about now? Those reasons weren't in play during that decade. We liked our leaders according to how much money we thought they were putting into our pockets. We liked them when they talked tough or kindly at the appropriate moments. We liked them if they were good at starting and finishing wars against people who deserved our wrath. A lot of us believed in evil during that decade. Evil people could understand. Bad guys were bad guys, and we were the good guys. We had more trouble understanding problems that couldn't be put down to evil. When bad things happened that were caused by nature or by luck or by our own ignorance, we were not comfortable. We much preferred to point a finger at something and hate it. But it was hard to hate nature or luck or ignorance. These are abstractions, and we've never been good at hating abstractions. Loving abstractions is a different matter. Some people remarked that God was testing us. We had to firm up our faith. We had to open our hearts to Him. Others claimed we needed to relax. They said life itself was one big crapshoot. They said you had to make constant change your constant friend. The universe was handing you lemons, and what were you going to do about it? Other people gave up saying anything and instead focused on their careers and their vices. They worked long hours and drank too much. Then there were those who cleaned their guns and prepared for the end game. Still others smiled and nodded. They were the lucky ones. Life for them was always just a big party. There definitely was a lot of confusion in that decade. Now there is none. We are clear-eyed about what happened and what didn't happen that should have. During that decade, we were battling enemies on a number of fronts. There were people everywhere who, it was said, despised our way of life. There were others who wanted it. It seemed like we were always either going to foreign lands to kill people or building walls around our own to keep them out. Our leaders claimed we were spreading freedom and combating terror, but in fact we were creating less of the first and more of the second. It was easy to see why people resented us. We'd made off with a bigger slice of the good stuff than anybody else. It turned out the planet had a finite supply of it. Who knew? Yet we were happy to share the secrets of our success, as long as in doing so we didn't have to give up our slice. We had innovation and technology to offer, for a price. We were all about business. We were productive and efficient. We could show others how to get the job done. If you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. There were a few angry men who didn't want to pay our price and eat for a lifetime. The price wasn't that high. It was simply to be our friends and share with us anything they had that we wanted. There was always something we wanted. Instead, the angry men denounced us. Some tried to destroy us. None of us could really explain their wrong-headedness. Why try? Bottom line was we'd wanted peace, but they'd driven us to war. Fortunately, we were very good at it. We were worried about our children during that decade. To worry about children is nothing new, but during that decade they were giving us something different to worry about. It wasn't because of anything we'd been doing. It wasn't because we'd held anything back. We'd provided everything. If they wanted toys, we bought toys. If they wanted friends, we arranged friends. If they wanted praise, we heaped praise. Yet they grew up to be people we loved but couldn't quite like. They were not chips off the old block. They were savvier than us. They were gentler than us. They hated less than we did. But it wasn't those things that repelled us. We didn't mind if they improved upon us in those ways. We were glad of that. But they had a bearing about them we didn't recognize. We couldn't see ourselves in them as all parents secretly hope. They failed to value what we ourselves were doing. Even when they went to the trouble of making us proud, we suspected they were just going through the motions. What it seemed to come down to was them not caring about their future in the way we cared about ours. They thought their future was bleak. We detected an implication that it was our fault. Maybe that was what troubled us. Yet they stood by the abyss that was all their tomorrows and did not draw back. They were happy to walk the edge. Their moment was an eternal present. They wore a knowing smile. When we were young, we complained when somebody got chocolate in our peanut butter. These youngsters complained that the world they would inherit had been ruined in advance. Yet they accepted their lot and rolled with it. Their equanimity chastened us, but it also angered us. We said we'd grown up with nuclear holocaust hanging over our goddamn heads. We knew about threats. We knew about the wages of sin. But these greenhorns just shook their tousled heads. They said we didn't get it. They said we believed risks brought rewards. They said that now there was only risk. They said we still believed the glass was half full. But they said we'd drunk from it too freely. Then they laughed and danced and sang. They were our children, but sometimes it felt like we were theirs. We constantly groused that we were being lied to during that decade. Lies were the coin of the realm. We were all liars. Perhaps it would be better to say other people were liars during that decade. Corporations lied, politicians lied, the media lied. The sphere of publicly available information was a swirling maelstrom of controvertible facts that no longer bore connections to something once guilelessly referred to as truth. Many folks had thought truth was supposed to be placed before you like a waiter bringing your meal. But what was this slop? Hadn't we ordered something different? And we knew the cooks were spitting in the food. The funny thing was we still ate it up. What choice did we have? It was what was for dinner. We were also lied to by people who wanted to sell us something. That had always been the case, but now everybody was selling. We'd become a sales culture all the way down. Some people began to see even their own personalities and experiences as marketable product lines. They considered themselves brands. They reflected on their own unique selling propositions. Many began to behave as if they were actors on television. They didn't live their lives but performed them. The worst lies were the ones we told ourselves. We were living in a world that made us prisoners to elaborate fantasies. One young man woke up every day and lied to himself in the mirror. He said, "Today I will help make the world a better place." Then he went to work at a large financial institution. A widow lied to her grown-up children. She said, "I'll live in your basement just until I get back on my feet." But she was unskilled and old. All the lying came to mean we couldn't trust one another, couldn't believe anyone was what they appeared to be. As a result, nobody was authentic anymore. Unselfish motivations were a thing of the past. Everyone was working an angle. If you were working the same angle, there was no problem. If you were working a different angle, look out, you might be eaten. It was the morality of a fish tank. We were finding it difficult to imagine solutions to our common problems. We were encouraged to cast these problems as personal challenges. We became very private in our misery. Money ruled that decade. Money rules any decade. Money was once again making kings of some and beggars of others. Many folks thought that by generating more of it, we could turn the beggars into kings. But we'd forgotten that money was just a promise about stuff we would do for one another down the line. The promises we were choosing to make had nothing to do with what needed to be done. Most of these promises would never be kept. There wasn't enough planet or time to make good on them. Yet we'd gone and promised ourselves a fantasy world and moved right in. We knew it was a fantasy, but knowing didn't end the make-believe. We had to play our parts and make sure the long-running production didn't close down. We were actors and needed the work. It seemed nobody could figure out how to promise ourselves back into the real world, which kept spiraling downward even as the money kept piling up. At least we ate well during that decade. We didn't miss too many meals. We knew our way around a plate. Unlimited buffets were the rage. The country's steam tables were heaped high. Naturally, there were those who went to bed hungry, but most went to bed full. Many of us were very large human beings. We were generously fleshed. Skinny people were rare. They were mostly in the movies or ill. The rest of us struggled with weight. We weren't proud of it, but we got used to it. We drove roomy vehicles to complement our girth. We built the biggest cars on the planet. When foreigners visited us, they were amazed at the size of us. We were like a nation of emperors. We put sugar in everything. There was sugar in our water and sugar in our meat. Truly, we lived on the Big Rock Candy Mountain. Some observers took our largeness as a sign of prosperity. It might have been so. But it was also the flip side of our inwardness. Eating was a way to connect our lonely selves back to something larger. Our country was the great teat that supplied all we needed. We knew who we were and what we were made of. We could eat what we darn well pleased and no one could say boo. To deprive ourselves of anything that tasted good was almost unpatriotic. Food linked the private mouth to family and community. It was part of every event. You couldn't watch a man hit a ball or your child take her first steps without sucking up soda. Food was always there for us. We gathered it in and celebrated ourselves. Even so, we began to wonder if we were still winners during that decade. We'd heard a lot of talk about decline. Industries went bust and banks failed. Small towns emptied and jails filled. Folks were doped up or stressed out. The decline was much in evidence. But then we also heard the talk about our greatness. Here too there was proof. We could see our sleek drones blowing things up. We could see our great men and women strutting across the world's stages. We could see fleets of trucks whipping goods throughout the land. We had to concede we were still winners. But even winners could hit dry spells. We began to fear our luck might not last forever. We spent a good deal of time that decade trying to decipher the nature of losing. Was it a slowdown in the rate at which we were getting rich? Did it have something to do with the high price of oil? Was it correlated with the number of people without work or with too much of it? Was it a product of broken marriages or poor church attendance? Was it in the nature of our excellence to be dissatisfied with abundance? Did our greatness depend on perpetual insecurity? There were a variety of metrics. Who could keep track of them all? We came to realize that though we thought of ourselves as winners, most of us were only breaking even. Many were on long losing streaks. Some were even throwing in their cards. The house didn't want us to notice the despair. It played elaborate games to keep us occupied. But we weren't to be occupied. We looked up from the card table and saw the dealer with his black eyes and waxed mustaches. There was a gadget in his ear and he was receiving intelligence from someone else. That particular gentleman was in another room behind mirrored glass. We knew it was he who was rigging the game. Who he was remained a point of discussion. But the marks were finally getting wise. The bamboozling had gone on too long. We discovered our voices and used them. Let's say some of us did. It was a great moment for that decade. It lasted about 5 minutes. Then it was back to chit-chat around the gaming table. We were easily distracted in that decade. Focus withered and inattention bloomed. We'd built auxiliary brains to carry in our hands. These little devices throbbed with salience. We ran our thoughts through them and anchored ourselves in the elsewhere. We were conducting a giant unplanned field test in outsourcing intelligence. The disturbing results were coming in, but nobody was moved by them. It was too late anyhow. We adored those things. We held them before us like prayer wheels and spun them incessantly. Worshipping whom? That was a dumb question. All prayer is finally self-flattery. In their dazzling screens we found mirrored our chief vanities. Worst hit were the young. An entire generation was being raised in a simulacrum of community. Real community involves obligations and demands. Real community can't be toggled out of. This so-called community was just narcissism with paper-thin walls. You could hear your neighbors and know their every move. But your bonds with them were weak and casual. They were little more than strangers. They wouldn't have recognized you on the street. Your true allegiance was to the device and the network. In those virtual commons we rambled alone among pleasing images. Each of us became the center of an infinite circumference. Our minds were forever voyaging on strange seas of clickbait. In that decade we could link to everything and therefore we connected with nothing. During that decade the loud people got the biggest hearing. Again, this was nothing new. One fellow correctly opined that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. The loud people were the usual types, the soul doctors, the self-help gurus, the shiny people, the blood and soil gang, the purse string boys, the beltway glad-handers, the masters of capital. There was a lot of cross-talk. It wasn't as if the loud people were all on the same page. Everybody had something different to push. The soul doctors had eternity covered. The self-help gurus talked about personal power and self-esteem. The shiny people traded in sex and fantasy. The blood and soil gang waved the flag. The purse-string boys acted the stern father. The glad-handers played the blame game and worked the gallery. The masters carried the big sticks. From the loud people gushed the usual puffery and mumbo-jumbo. Their pronouncements could be exposed easily, but seldom were. Their truths became ours. It was just easier that way. The loud people as a whole were self-serving. It was no coincidence that what they wanted for the rest of us would also reward them lavishly. But you had to admit that among the loud people were some who seemed to be talking a line closer to our own. These people did their level best to use their volubility for the greater good, whatever that was. We admired such people. We were a culture that always rooted for the underdog and the lone wolf. They were out there calling for an end to this or a start to that. They pleaded for our support. We would perk up for a time. Perhaps our admiration for these few was what made it possible to put up with the rest. What all the loud people had in common was their love of stability. The best quo was the status quo. Revolution wasn't their cup of tea. Change would be allowed to enter the picture, but it had to be doled out. Reform was a word that people were pleased to say. Reform tripped off the tongue and never ruffled feathers. The loud people called for more of it. But in that decade we needed more than reform. We needed more than a new coat of paint. The loud people wouldn't hear of it. We didn't listen enough to the quiet people of that decade. We now wish we had. Their voices could not be heard over the din. They were in faraway lands and their faces didn't look like ours. Some of these people lived in villages perched in mountain passes. They lived there until the villages were swept away by flash floods. The survivors asked about the snow. Why was there less of it falling? Why was there more rain? Was it like this in our country as well? Did we fear the spring as they did? Then there were those in the high latitudes who wondered where the cold had gone and why the trees leaned so precipitously. They said the ground that was once frozen all year had turned to mud. They said they couldn't travel over the ice as they once had. The ice was rotten and they fell through it. Was the cold coming back? If not, how were they to hunt? In other places, people wandered over new deserts. The grass had withered and their cattle starved. They were left with next to nothing. Raiders came and took even that. Their men were killed and their daughters stolen. These people questioned the price of progress. They linked their own troubles with something we were doing. It was hard for them to see the big picture. You wished you could explain to them the ways of the world, but they probably wouldn't get it. Poor devils. One woman spoke for the rest. Why does the world turn its back on us? We only want a place with adequate water and good grass so we can herd our beasts and feed our children. You are so rich. Why do you let this happen? Then there were those who lived on islands that were disappearing under the waves. They knew they had to take steps, but what steps could they take? For them, there was no high ground. Again, these people thought we should do something for them, but we couldn't stop the oceans from rising, if they were rising. Even so, we wanted to work with them on their issues. We called them our partners. We were prepared to open dialogues. We would hold multilateral talks. In the meantime, we had our own problems to deal with. Our coasts were washing away too. Golf courses and second homes were at risk. Insurance was a bitch. We reminded the islanders that we were all in the same boat. But we knew deep down that there were many boats. Thank goodness ours was the biggest and armed to the teeth. In that decade, we woke up to discover that no longer was there an us. We were a ragged polity split down the middle like a hacksawed frozen turkey. We occupied two separate realities. We talked mostly to those who shared the same reality. Each side thought a skunk with its head stuck in a pickle jar had a better chance of connecting reality's dots than did the other side. We preferred a world and beings in it that mirrored our own immaculate visages. Communication across the realities was shouting curses into a void. Common terms held different meanings. Freedom was an example. For some, freedom meant freedom to. For others, freedom meant freedom from. Half of us wanted to lay the groundwork for a better future. Half of us thought the future should look like the past. Demagogues rose and some of us knelt, others refused to kiss the ring. Suspicion and mistrust nestled in the bosom of the national character. We looked down our noses. We glanced over shoulders. We asked questions later. Elections were no longer grand recalibrations of democratic will, but harrowing monstrations of popular loathing followed by years of public burnings. A brutal sense of fraternal betrayal alternated between the two halves of the turkey. There was a mood that possessed some of us throughout that decade. It was hard to put your finger on it. It wasn't yet despair, but it was more than disappointment. It could be described as a bad day at the county fair. There was music and lights. There was candy and popcorn. There was laughter and excitement. Kids were screaming their fool heads off. But there was an underlying stench of vomit and shit. It tainted everything. You couldn't enjoy the rides or the shows. You had to shuffle around with a stupid grin plastered on your face. You knew you'd be stuck there all day. The mood was also related to grief. You suspected a lot of things were going missing. You began mourning for the old days, when you could remember what they were like. The loss of stuff that had been part of your life was leaving holes. You could poke your fingers through them. You could almost touch what had filled them. But that too was slipping away. This sense of slippage had been described by Emerson. He wrote that the evanescence and lubricity of things is the most unhandsome part of our condition. And he grieved that grief could teach us nothing. Our strange mood also taught us nothing. We just bore it. We got used to feeling wrong in the world. Maybe that's how we let ourselves drift to this place where we are now. That decade. Any number of cliches could describe it. They were not the best of times, but not yet the worst. We lost much, but we soldiered on. Our upper lips were still plenty stiff. We seemed to be the sort of people who could put up with anything. We adapted. We optimized. We shrugged off contradictions. We kept faith with the delusion of permanence. Perhaps we were strong. More likely, we were just numb. But it was the wrong decade for numbness. We were entering the storm. Our grip on the tiller was weakening. We couldn't correct our course. Maybe there never was a time when we could. The boat was foundering. It seemed that very soon we'd be pitched into the sea. If we were right about nothing else in that decade, we were right about that. For now we are up to our necks in violent waters. It's all we can do to stay afloat. There's no bottom to this deluge. We've run out of metaphors. Ought lost its chance. We're dealing with is. We know there's worse to come.